Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the PR in Review podcast, where we'll be sharing our personal perspectives on all matters PR and communications. My name is Daphine Ekinamushabire. I am a communications practitioner with over a decade of experience in communications, and I will be your host for this show. Joining me this evening are three lovely ladies. Sharon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Ishimwe. I am a communications and leadership professional with experience spanning international development, the impact sector, government, and entrepreneurship in East Africa and Canada. I'm very happy to be part of the first episode of what I think is Uganda's first ever public relations podcast.
You're welcome, Sharon. And to my right is Gertrude.
Thank you so much, Daphine. My name is Gertrude Emojong. I much prefer to be known as Trudy Emojong. I am a communications professional with over 10 years of experience. I cut my teeth mostly in marketing communications, but right now I am very passionate about development communications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trudy, and you're welcome. And in front of me is Nancy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Akullo. I am a PR and communications practitioner. I have been around for a while, I think about 13 years now. And my experience has been mostly in education and healthcare. And tonight, I'm just happy to share my experience and perspectives on this podcast.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
On this episode, we will examine crisis communications using the current Uganda Ebola communications response. And just give ourselves a background. Currently, the country is reeling from the effects of the recent Ebola virus outbreak. Bans on international travel. And just recently on X, his name again, what's the gentleman? Amos Wekesa. Yes, Amos Wekesa. Shared how the international airport in Entebbe was empty, no flights, no people coming into the country, and no flights leaving the country. Mm-hmm. So that means there's been a lot of businesses that have been affected. We recently saw the UAE travel bans for Ugandans, the US, and just a couple, so many of them. And government communications on the disease have been met with mixed reactions, with some people arguing that there shouldn't have been any public communication. Because then if you contain or quote unquote deny, then you don't really people will not know what's going on. And you are able to keep face or reputation, if that's what people call it. And there's been this whole new trend and a new approach by Alan Kasuja, the one-liner press releases. And we'd want to really see what's the impact on strategic communications. Those one-liners, are they good? What do we think as communication practitioners? So this evening, I'd really like for you ladies I want us to just discuss the strategies. Do you deem these strategies most appropriate? And we have just a few of them. Deny strategy. Is it good to just deny? When we're in school, they tell us that sometimes you deny. Or strategic silence, just keep quiet, what maybe most Ugandans, especially those in tourism, thought the country should have done, or do a responsive communication strategy. And we'll start with you, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Daphine. For me, deny and silence are a non-starter, to be honest, because we are dealing with an epidemic. And an epidemic is a disease that spreads fast. So when you deny the existence of an epidemic, you're not helping the country, because then it means we cannot have containment measures. It also means the public is not going to be aware. So the likelihood of this epidemic or this disease to escalate is really high, since there's no public awareness and there's very limited vigilance. So for me, the first two are not an option. I would go for the option C, which is a responsive communication strategy, for a number of reasons. For starters, Uganda is a member country of the WHO. We are a member state. We have membership with the WHO.
Yes.
And the WHO has health emergency response protocols that member states are required to comply with. And very critical to that is transparency and public communication. So it's not like Uganda has a choice in this in managing this disease. We have to communicate. It's a requirement, and we have to be compliant. And the danger with silence and sweeping the disease under the rug is number one. Like I mentioned earlier, if people are not aware, then they cannot take the appropriate measures to contain the disease, because forewarned is forearmed. So the likelihood for them to embrace hand sanitizers, hand washing is then very low, because they're not aware, they cannot act. But also another danger, and this is from a communications perspective, is misinformation. So what would if the government chose a silent strategy or to manage the disease quietly without communicating, what would likely happen is that individuals within the community who get infected would then become the citizen journalists. They would begin reporting. So, and the danger with that is that when citizens initiate such sensitive communication, there's a likelihood for misinformation, but also then there's panic, because everybody's going to say what they want to say. And you don't want that with a crisis, because if you have everybody communicating and you have and you have the ministry then being reactionary as opposed to being proactive, then you have a full-blown crisis at your hand. So for me, I think the ministry has done a good thing. They're being responsible, which is very important, because the ministry owes a duty of care to Ugandans when it comes to epidemics and health emergencies.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was very elaborate. And I'll move to Sharon. I remember for me, it was the very first outbreak in Uganda. I think it was in the 2000, I don't remember the exact year, but I remember I was a young girl, and I was always at my mom's shop opposite the regional referral hospital in Bara. And I kid you not, I thought I was dying. For every truck that passed and they were taking someone who had unfortunately passed on, I thought I was dying, because there was no information for me as a child. So I'd also like to hear from you, what strategy from the strategies that we shared do you think would be the most appropriate?
I think Nancy has done such a wonderful job explaining what the, I guess, most viable strategy is. We know about countries that have the capacity to deny the existence of situations like this, and they do it so well, for their tourism, for their business sector, for investment and things like that. They do such a good job, but that doesn't take away the fact that the problems actually exist within their communities. Unfortunately, Ebola is not one of those things that you can successfully deny, because it will spread. It's also a bit tricky now that you can hardly segment your audiences and speak just to them. So if we said, well, we have Ebola in just one district, in this day and age, it's hard to only communicate and contain travel within that district, but also to ensure that the messages that are being shared are contained in just that district. It's very complicated now. However, I would love to highlight what, quote unquote, would be the closest that we've had in this country in terms of like denial of the epidemic. And that is, we've seen a few press releases that just go like, hey, 0 Ebola cases in Uganda, 0 deaths. Or when there was a death, we said, okay, 0 cases or only 2 cases. Schools are open. Everything's business as usual. And the only case that we've had has been an imported one. I feel like that's the first time that we've taken that kind of approach. And I'd love to give credit to it Reason being, for a very long time, Africa has given its, like the power of our narratives has been given to the Western world. True. I actually feel sorry for saying the Western world, because Western from who, from where is the central? But you know what I'm talking about. Yes. They've had the power to shape the stories, the narratives, and say whatever they want to say about our countries. And you could also use the example of the Al Jazeera story that said, so many number of Ebola cases are in Congo and Uganda. And Uganda had just less than 10, I believe, at that time. But they felt comfortable and confident to lump us together. So that kind of communication that just pushed back on that narrative, that I believe actually brought people to pull back, media houses to pull back, international media houses to separate the two countries, to say, there's DRC and then there's Uganda, and the situations between these two countries is very different. I think that happened because Ugandans spoke up, in a sense. Ugandans, the media center spoke up. I believe internal affairs also spoke up, and they pushed back. And I believe it was critical. To me, it was very critical that they did that at that time, because all eyes were on Uganda. If the world is scared of this very deadly disease that's coming out of Congo and Uganda, then they're listening to us. They're watching what we are putting out. So it was wonderful that, there was a bit of that. You could call it, quote unquote denial, but like it worked. I think it did magic for us as a country, taking back our own narrative.
I found myself countless times, like almost every day, I'd go to my X and just refresh the feed to make sure that I see new things from the Ministry of Health. What are they saying about this? What is the new data? And I think that for me, even from what I've just heard from you and Nancy, is that we believe the government did a good job, because even with that information, different citizens were empowered to push back on the narratives that you just mentioned, the Western Al Jazeera narratives, even WHO, at the very start. So moving to Trudy, please share with us your perspectives.
I definitely concur with Nancy and Sharon that the government did actually quite well in communicating about this crisis and actually containing this crisis. And Uganda actually does have quite a good track record when it comes to public health and managing pandemics and epidemics and so forth. So definitely, we have a moral duty as communication professionals, and even the government has a moral duty to us to make sure that we're informed so that the citizens can protect themselves from this disease and that we can contain its spread. In addition to having that moral duty to keep us informed, of course, not all information is necessary. In communication, there's levels of sensitivity of the messaging, Definitely you have to be confidential. You're not going to release the names of those people who are afflicted or affected by the virus and so forth. So definitely, I also agree with Sharon that the government did very well in controlling this narrative about Uganda. I recall when the story first broke, one of my friends actually asked me, she had a flight planned she had a flight planned and she was coming to Uganda, and she said, you know what? She actually called when she was very distressed. I've heard the news. I've seen the news. It seems it's terrible out there. And I said, the Western world has a way of actually blowing things out of proportion or spinning a kind of narrative about Africa. And I shared with her, that's not actually the case. You should follow the Uganda Media Center. You should actually follow Ugandan Twitter, and there you'll get a more balanced view of the situation at hand. So definitely, even there's a place for citizen journalism. Citizens can lend credibility to their information. They can bring the balance. They can bring the view. Definitely, there are cases where there'll be misinformation and even disinformation from citizen journalists because they don't have those layers that you'd have in traditional media houses where there's an editor, there's a policy that needs to be followed before news is disseminated. So definitely, I would give the Uganda Media Center their flowers, and the micro press releases was actually really brilliant. Those one-liner press releases were really brilliant. It was a way to cut through the noise In this day and age, we suffer from clutter, media clutter. It was a brilliant way to cut through it, to actually disrupt the information that was being disseminated at that time.
Thank you very much, Gertrude. I also thought those were really very brilliant. You see, ultimately, as comms people, we know that one thing. What's the use of a message? You want to communicate something. And we also know that we don't really have, not that we don't have the time to read, but people and how information moves so fast. You're on X, you're scrolling, something comes, something more exciting that isn't this comes. So I think that was brilliant. We'll have a point where we give comms flowers. So I think Uganda Media Center will definitely take their flowers. So just moving on, I would want to discuss message framing. So we've all agreed that the responsive communication strategy to Ebola was the best. So which message framing approach would you adopt from the alternatives that I will share? Bolstering strategy. Reinforce confidence by portraying Uganda as a safe destination. Information-centered strategy. Focus on the factual evidence-based updates without narrative framing. Fear appeal strategy. Instill fear to enforce compliance through emphasizing the consequences of non-compliance. Scapegoating strategy. Attribute blame to the original country. And lastly, reassurance and response strategy. Focus on factual, evidence-based updates while highlighting Uganda's preparedness, non-health emergency response capabilities, and ongoing containment. And this time, I'll start with Sharon.
That was quite a long list of options. Can I just say whatever the last one was?
Reassurance and response strategy.
Exactly. Reassurance and response strategy. I think the Ministry of Health has done such a good job, and I think they're keeping lessons from every emergency that they've had to go through, taking notes of those and ensuring that, at the time that, something comes up, they can pull from notes that they've taken in the past. And we've seen that preparedness with the messaging. We've seen that preparedness with the way that doctors are organized really, really quickly, the way that treatment centers are set up really fast, and the way that the disease and the actions that people need to take has also been communicated. I think one thing that made me really happy recently is the messages from the Director General of the World Health Organization. It felt like he ate up everything that Uganda has been saying, and then he went ahead and tweeted, and you would think, oh, this tweet came from the government of Uganda or from Media Center, because he's talking about how, where each of the cases came from and how a lot of them were not originally from this country. However, I would like to say, even if they were not originally from this country, they've interacted with people in this country. So there's precaution to take around that, especially where giving a geographical ownership of a disease to a country. Funny thing is, this one is called Bundibujo, which is very much a Ugandan district. So we could cry at the mountaintop about how, it's all of these people from the DRC carrying it. But these harms that causes when we tie a disease to a group of people. Probably that's a conversation for another time. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Sharon. You mentioned something quite important that, in crisis, it's important that what you've gone through before, you learn from it, you document, and then, whatever good you did then, you can then use it at the next time you have. It doesn't have to be a health crisis. It can be anything. Organizations go through different.
Certainly. And just to build on that, data helps build confidence amongst the people. There's a quote that says human beings are sense-making creatures. So in the absence of data, we make up stories. Oh. So imagine the Ministry of Health wasn't releasing numbers every day, then we would create whatever stories we wanted in our own heads, because as in our nature as humans, we always are telling stories to ourselves.
Very true.
So by the ministry speaking up, they're taking charge of the story.
It's very true. Thank you very much, Sharon. I think we will move to Gertrude and then we will end with Nancy.
Thank you, Daphine. I definitely agree with Sharon that you can use, it depends really, the strategy you're going to employ or the kind of messaging you're going to use really depends on the time, the place, the situation at hand.
Sure.
And each strategy will be necessary depending on with what you're dealing with and what crisis you're dealing with. I would say that there's a place and a time even for scapegoating. As much as it sounds very un-peerish, there's a place and time for scapegoating where you have to control the narrative, and unfortunately there has to be a scapegoat. There has to be a scapegoat in that narrative because it's for the greater good, it's for the greater good of the community, it's for the greater good for everyone, to have that scapegoat in that. Probably not in health communication or health crisis, because there you're going to stigmatize a group or stigmatize a person. I take issue with the virus being called Bundubujo virus because that is going to bring stigma to the people of Bundubujo, and in communication, you want to do as little harm as possible. As possible in your messaging. However, I'm cognizant that is how diseases are named. Probably the strain of virus is particular to Bundubujo. It's probably how it's being differentiated from other strains of Ebola. However, that is something I think between the communication professionals and the epidemiologists and the people who are controlling disease that can actually be worked on. How do we identify diseases without stigmatizing a group or a place, etc.? I think we recall what happened when we had COVID-19 and it was being traced back, and Wuhan, China was being scapegoated in that conversation that it's because of these people and so forth and so forth. And that means that you tread a very fine line. You may actually move into hate speech and discrimination with that kind of that kind of communication, with that kind of naming of the disease.
Yeah, that was actually since changed. That's why COVID-19 was not named. So WHO since changed that. So I think maybe if we could say that they change all the others, but I think that's very impossible.
I think the rule concerns new conditions. So unfortunately, this Bundubujo strain was named in 2007, and I wanted to know who named it that. Unfortunately, we can't point at WHO as having done that. It was just a group of scientists, and I believe a lot of them Ugandan, who discovered this thing in Bundubujo and then called it that. And I think a lot of I also had to look up how many diseases were named after locations in America. And I found that there's quite a number. But it's wonderful that now you can't do that anymore.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's good to hear.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gertrude. Nancy, would love to hear you.
Yeah, so initially my money was on the communication strategy, communicating the facts direction, because I felt that we did not need to sensationalize this communication, and we just needed to give people what they need to know. Tell them this is what is happening, this is the number of cases we've registered, these are the number of deaths, this is the number of people under contact tracing. But then watching the news, and Sharon talked about it, watching the news on Monday, I believe it was NTV, my perspective changed. I think when it comes to crisis communication, it's very important to build trust and enhance credibility, because merely telling people that we have Ebola in Uganda, these are the number of cases, this is what we are doing about it, is not sufficient to convince an international audience to change their mind about coming to Uganda.
Sure.
So I think based on that, I would go with reassurance. And as I mentioned earlier, I liked what the the head of the WHO did on I think it was Monday this week, where he went before the media and he said, you know what, we are pleased with Uganda's response to this epidemic. And we know that based on previous experience, Uganda has the capacity to contain this disease. And then also on that same bulletin, a representative, I think from the US Centers for Disease Control, was also interviewed, and she was speaking a similar language. She was reassuring the audience that the US has confidence in Uganda's capability to manage the disease. So then for me, such messages are reassuring for somebody who's not in Uganda, because then if I know that, yes, Uganda has Ebola, but based on previous experience, they have the capacity to contain it and they're doing A, B, C, D to contain it, then I can change my mind about not coming to Uganda, because I have been reassured that there's stringent measures that are being implemented. So for me, that strategy really works. And the other thing is that this message coming from third parties was even more effective as opposed to it coming from Ugandans. Because if you have WHO rallying behind Uganda and saying, you know what, we are confident in Uganda's response and we are calling upon the international community to lift the travel bans on Uganda, then you have the America's CDC also speaking, sharing a similar communication. For me, that bolsters trust and credibility in Uganda's response system. So yeah, that strategy would work for me.
Thank you very much, Nancy, Sharon, and Gertrude. But from everything that you've said, for me, one thing stands out. It's important to control your narrative, and especially in crisis communications, because when you don't, then someone is going to run with whatever they want, and they can make you look whichever way they choose. And of course, WHO comes to say this after consistent communication from Uganda, from the Uganda Media Council, from the Ministry of Health, and also, just normal Ugandan citizens on X. So I think for everyone, if there's anything you can take away from this, is it's important to control your narrative. So earlier we just touched a bit about it, the one-liner press releases. I'd just love to hear.
I'm laughing because I have an interesting perspective, but let's hear.
Yeah, I would love to hear.
One-liner.
One. And it's been so many other, whether it's a brand or something and they want to just share the information. What are your thoughts? I will start with Nancy.
Wow.
To speak.
Okay, I thought you'd start with Sharon and Trudy, since they are more in agreement with the one-liners. But yes, that's what you guys said. Did I recall?
I'm in agreement with the one-liners. I am in agreement with the micro press releases, especially when it comes to emergency communication, because you need to put out this communication immediately, I know that traditionally we were taught when there's a crisis, you need to have holding statements and whatnot. But in this day and age, with the rigorous bureaucratic processes in organizations and whatnot, you'll have the holding statement. You're going to the legal department to get clarity. You get to get approval. You're going to the executive director. In the case of the health ministry, you're going to all these officials to get approval of this holding statement. Whereas you can release this one-liner, which you need to communicate the most important thing. And then later on, you can share a more detailed press statement with more information and so forth, where you need to communicate immediately. And especially in our day and age where you need to cut through the noise. And unfortunately, we have a poor reading culture where people will probably skim through the press release, look for what is the most important information that is relevant to them, and move on. And that's how we get the bits and pieces of misinformation. So with crisis communication, I tend to concur. It cuts through the noise. You're able to communicate immediately. You probably don't have as rigorous back and forth with maybe legal or with management or so forth to get that messaging out. what is kind of disheartening right now is how the micro press release has become a trend on social media, and it's being hijacked. And, that's where it's going to become dangerous, because it's going to lose its meaning, and it's going to be just another social media trend, just another advertising or marketing gimmick, to push my product or to push my agenda. It has a time and place for emergency communication, for a crisis where we need to get the information out immediately.
Yes.
And you need to capture the audience's attention. Yes. If it's in a different situation, where there needs to be more context, more background, probably you can go the traditional route of having the more lengthy, detailed press release.
But we still need them. Because really, I think the goal, when you're in comms, you just want to get your message across. But please, Nancy.
Yeah, so let me begin by saying I like what Alan Kasuja is doing. He has gotten our attention. Like, even somebody who didn't know that the Uganda Media Center existed now knows, which means there's something he's doing right.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree with Trudy and Alan, and I think Sharon as well, that we need to be concise in our communication, because ultimately communication is measured by effectiveness. And if you're going to be effective, you need feedback. For people to give you feedback, they need to listen to you, or they need to read the message. So I absolutely agree on that front. My bone of contention is with the use of tools for the wrong purpose. And let me explain.
Please do.
So I think even as we embrace this new wave of conciseness, of brevity, we shouldn't throw out the traditional principles of communication, especially clarity. Remember back in school, we talked about the 7 C's of communication: clarity, completeness, conciseness, etc. So speaking about clarity and completeness, I think it's important that we use the correct tool for the correct purpose and for the correct audience. A press release, the primary audience for a press release is the media, right?
Press.
Yes.
The press.
So, press, hence press. And so when you're communicating to the media, remember the goal, when you write a press release, you're communicating to the media, but your goal is to have news generated from that press release. So I'm looking at an editor, let's say in the Middle East, and they're saying this one-liner press release that says, Uganda, business as usual, no schools closed. I don't remember the second sentence. What is an editor who doesn't, first, it didn't even have, I think, response to Ebola. So this editor or reporter in the Middle East is looking at this, and he's because it's just 2 sentences, he has a million questions going through his mind. Why would schools be closed in the first place? What sickness? Is just assuming he doesn't have context. But even if he has context, there are questions he would have that will not be answered in a one-liner. Remember, with news, you need urgency and timeliness. So he has to then pick up the phone and call the author of the document and seek clarity, which is time consuming. So, and the other thing is, I think not every piece of communication warrants a press release. There are other tools that we can use. It can be a public notice. For example, if you're communicating a public holiday and you're saying Mother's Day remains a public holiday, do you need a press release for that? Wouldn't a public notice suffice? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, we need to be concise, but let's bear in mind the audience that we are communicating to, the goal and purpose of our communication, and that should guide us in using the appropriate tool. All public communication does not need to be a press release if you're not desiring to elicit news from it. If you're communicating a public holiday, you can use a public notice. For me, the underlying issue here is using the correct tool, especially when it comes to the media. They really need context. And if you share with them a one-liner, that's not much for them to go on. So they will have to keep calling. They'll have these 101 questions that need to be answered. So that's my take on the one-liners.
Thank you very much, Nancy. You've taken us to school, girl.
She definitely has. And like, if she hadn't brought it up, I was going to ask us to define what a press release is. But I think in her explanation, she actually has done it, and she's done it really well. I think one thing that we need to pay attention to is that media houses have cut down their number of staff. It's not just Uganda, it's all over the world that traditional media specifically is not well funded anymore. They're not making enough money. So what do? They cut down the number of staff. And what ends up happening is that when you hand them a news release, a press release, a lot of them will just print it as is. So they're looking for things like context. They're looking for like some quotes to give this release a bit more credit, give it some flesh, something to work with. But also in communications, I think we come from a place of this person knows nothing. So you feed them as much as possible. Also in practice, as a communications person, you have to ask like 5 questions down the road, like feed people as much as possible so they don't have to come back to you to look for information. Again, there's so many other people competing for the same limited media space.
Very true.
So how do you cut through? How do you stand out from the crowd? By like giving media as much good quality information, and that also includes like pictures and videos, so that as if need be, they can just print whatever you've given to them. However, like Nancy, I also feel like Mr. Kasuja has done such a good job bringing Media Center to the limelight. One might wonder, does the Media Center actually need the limelight? Or does the Media Center actually need to send out press releases? Unfortunately, none of the 4 of us can answer that question. However, I have an argument which would basically have all of communications professionals working under the Media Center. If the Media Center is government's quote unquote communications agency, if the Media Center communicates for the government of Uganda, then the Media Center should technically be in charge of all communication coming out of all of the departments, the ministries of Uganda. So if it's the Ministry of Health, if the Ministry of Health is releasing a press release, that press release will be looked at by somebody at Media Center. If Media Center is the ultimate communicator on behalf of government. So are all communications people hired by the Media Center? Or in this place and time, does the Media Center have oversight over the communications coming out of all of those departments? This would be a very long argument to have on this very first conversation. But I think the one-liners have done, if we are to review the performance of all press releases that have come out of this country, I think the best performing ones have been these one-liners. They've been shared on all social media. I think the challenge we have as people in this field is that everybody on the streets thinks they can do communications. They have a perspective to share. They know how it can be done best. So the challenge right now is that everybody is chiming in. I think there may not be a right or wrong, but if the goal of the Media Center was to get everyone's attention on them, I think they've done that excellently. Especially since just a few months ago, they were looking for funding. They were, I think, struggling with financing the office. So I think they've done a good job bringing themselves out there and showing that they're doing some work.
Sharon, if I can just interject here. You bring up a very valid point and a very valid challenge that as public relations professionals we face, where when we are composing these press releases, we write them as we'd write a news story, and we want to answer all the questions that traditionally, like you have a strong lead paragraph,
the what, why,
the
when,
who,
where.
what, when, why, where. It's the 5 W's and M's, yes, inverted pyramid and whatnot. And in this day and age where media houses, their budget is being cut down, and we have the rise of citizen journalism, and as PR professionals, we should actually think, ask ourselves, is it really, really necessary for us to do the work for journalists and actually have these elaborate press releases where you've answered all the questions, you've anticipated all the questions you'd have, you've provided enough context and background and whatnot. Yet a citizen journalist will pick up on a story and run with it, And whereas a PR professional, we want to build out as much of the story in the press release so that we can control the narrative. So are we enabling, for lack of a better word, lazy journalists? Yet you have citizen journalists who are, running at the opportunity to put out news, to be the first ones to break news.
When they come for you, we will not be there.
Yeah. I like to think of it as empowering these journalists to run our stories like as quickly as possible and as conveniently as possible. Because again, they're understaffed. A lot of them and all of you have worked in communications in this country. So you know that when you reach out to a journalist or to a media house, they'll ask for transport. And transport doesn't mean border fee to get to the destination. It means, it's like, in America or other countries where you're encouraged to tip because servers are not paid enough. I feel like that's what's happening when it comes to media in Uganda. Media houses are not paying journalists enough. So whoever needs to get their story covered and stuff like that has to sort of cough up some money to make that happen. So for me, it's also time saving on my part as a communications person to provide as much information as possible. So I don't have 10 media calls coming into my office every day. It also works for me and for whoever is going to be quoted in this new story, whoever is the main voice in this story, to have their quote going out ahead of time so they don't have to answer calls from journalists the whole time. So I think I'd like to think about it that way. And you raise a really good point around citizen journalism. And I love to see it on TikTok, Ugandan TikTok. Oh, it's also on, somehow I got into Ugandan LinkedIn. And it's pretty much like the same content.
I need to find that one.
Almost. But the thing is that we can't do away with one and just work with the other, because we still have people who only will think that something is credible because it's come through traditional media, and they will not pay attention to anything else. And we also have people who only pay attention to their TikTok superstars. And if you want your message going out, you have to find those superstars to deliver the message. Yeah.
But just to add a rejoinder to Sharon's submission very, very briefly. So the idea behind providing journalists with as much information as possible, as Sharon says, is about urgency, helping them to beat their deadlines, because you sometimes a journalist will call you and you're in a meeting. So that means if that information is not complete, then that story will not come out as soon as it's supposed to be, because there's a missing link that has not been provided. So it's just about helping them to achieve their goals of publishing timely news stories. And also, I'd like to think that a good journalist will always inquire further if the story is not complete. And I know that many times when we release press releases, especially if there's a crisis, of course it's going to be biased towards my organization. But journalists have a duty of fairness.
Yes.
So they will reach out to maybe the other organization that is being mentioned. Yeah. So I think they will still go that extra mile to have fair coverage if they need to. But let's give them what they need as much as possible.
Thank you very much, ladies. Like from all these things you're saying, I'm like, okay, we need to address this. We need to address this. We'll have to find another time and just put some of, because when you talk about government communications, goodness, it does not go beyond the tarmac. That's all I can say. Now you took us to school. Thank you very much, Nancy. It was wonderful to remember why we have a press release. And now I just want us to, just from each one of us quickly, really, what's the correct way to distribute the release? Really, why? And of course, in the era of social media, is it effective for distributing them? And I know you just talked about, is it you or Gertrude, about TikTok, people who will listen to their, their TikTok people. So maybe we'll start with you. What is the right way to share? And I think now I would also want to ground us within the changing trends, because the environment that our predecessors operated in is different from the one we're operating in now, as far as comms is concerned. So it would be good, I think, for whoever watches us to just, understand also with how trends have changed. So what do you think?
I think the best way to distribute your press release is wherever your media is. If you have media houses or reporters who are interested in the subject matter that you're trying to communicate, that's like low-hanging fruit. Those are the people you need to reach out to, and you need to reach out to them directly. If you're practicing public relations, you definitely have, or hopefully you, in practice or in theory, you have a media contact list.
Yeah.
You don't want to just send out your press release to everybody's inbox, because you're going to make people really mad that you're spamming them. If you send a story about a borehole being drilled in Chanamkaka to a sports reporter in Jinja, that's spam, right? So
True.
You build a list of journalists who report stories that are related to what you want, the message that you want to send out. Also a list of editors, because sometimes like you may be in the good books with the journalist, but the reporter won't assign them the story. So make sure that they are on board as well. So direct emailing, phone calls. It's also suggested that if you email, it's best to just put the press release in the body of the email, because again, people don't have time to be opening out attachments.
Heavy attachments.
A wonderful place for press releases to live is also your own media. So your websites, your social media as well. Social media, definitely. That's what you wanted me to hint on. It's a great place to release press releases. Sounds like a repetition, but to publish your press releases, I'll use that. I think what people are contending against is like the number of characters that you can have on, for example, a ex-post. I was going to say a tweet, and I was going to date myself. But yeah, so your ex-post, how many characters can you have? But there are very smart ways. You could just use one sentence. June 3rd is a public holiday, and then create a link that leads us to a place where we have more details around why June the 3rd is a public holiday in Uganda. Give us a quote, maybe from like a religious leader or people who are leading. I think there are communities in Uganda who are interested in knowing which choir, which district is responsible for worship at the event in Namugongo. Exactly. Maybe this time, I think this year, one of the most important things was that people were not sure whether they were going to work or not. If we are not going to Namugongo, do we have to report at the office? So who would be in charge of that? Would it be the Ministry of Labor? Would that be,
through Uganda,
the two ministers just recently appointed, coming out to say, hey, you don't have to go to work tomorrow. So yeah, social media definitely works for press releases, but yeah, add a link to some place where people can find more information, make it more human.
Thank you very much, Sharon. We'll go to Nancy and then we'll end with Gertrude.
Yeah, I agree with Sharon, because remember we said earlier that when it comes to press releases, your primary audience is the media. So use a direct approach. Email your press release to the journalists or editors that you are targeting. That's number one. To answer the question about social media, I agree with Sharon again. I think social media has become part of us, and it's one of the most effective tools for distributing press releases because of a number of reasons. Number one is timeliness. Mm-hmm. If you send your press release to Daily Monitor, New Vision, etc., you're at the mercy of their timelines. If you send it, let's say at this time, I think it's 8, whatever time it is, and the editor sees it tomorrow, most likely you'll make the Friday news. But if you have your own media that Sharon talked about, then you can publish it immediately. The other benefit of social media is reach. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So in addition to the reach that you would achieve using traditional media, you also have your audience that you're going to reach using social media. Mm. But very importantly also is engagement. And that's where, for me, social media now beats traditional media, because when you publish your press release on Facebook or X or etc.,
you have an opportunity.
You're going to get comments. Yes. So you have an opportunity to engage with your audience, and also you have an opportunity to measure sentiment, which then helps you to avert crisis. So if you know that if your sentiment score is negative, then you know, that's a red flag. There's something we need to do as an organization. So social media, excellent. But my advice would be to tailor. I think that's the key for social media. Tailor. So you're not going to write your 5 paragraphs of a press release, have it designed into a poster or an image and post it on Instagram. Which brings me to my next point. It's very important as communications practitioners to understand the algorithms for each platform, what works best. Mm-hmm. We know very well that on Instagram, short form video does the trick, and TikTok. And then when it comes to LinkedIn, long form text will do the magic. So it's important to understand what works for each platform and then tailor your message accordingly. So if I were publishing a press release on LinkedIn, for example, I'd publish it as an article. So LinkedIn has that option as opposed to a post. The benefit with publishing it as an article is then you benefit from SEO, search engine optimization, and then your press release gets easily discovered. Similar to X. X also has now has that option for publishing content as an article. That's what I would do. And then the other option for X, as Sharon mentioned, is have your one-liner, but link it to the full version on the website. Because like we said, you're not going to publish your 4 paragraphs on X as an image or as a poster. You can just have
out of 4.
Yes. You can just have 1 paragraph designed in your, what do they call it? The poster. And then have that content linked to the website. For Instagram, press releases, maybe carousels would work. Mm-hmm. Yes, and videos, if you have the time to transform it into short form video and carousel. But if you don't, for me, I would prioritize LinkedIn and X, because X is now known as the news platform. So those would be my go-to for publishing press releases.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Over to you, Trudy.
Thank you, Nancy. I am tempted to just say ditto and go the micro, give a micro response since we're discussing micro press releases. I agree with Sharon and Nancy, and I'm going to die on this hill of micro press releases. And I would say that X is actually the best platform for micro press releases. And you can have the link to the website or to have the more context and more details.
Thank you very much. It's just, with in the
sweet, like how micro press releases.
In this age of social media, and even my mind, I'm asking myself, well, it could be a topic for another day.
Yeah.
But we still even need traditional media. And maybe, as we talked about tailoring your message and understanding other platforms, I think for me, that's another thing that I would want to emphasize. It's important for you as a communications person to tailor your message. And to also, when you're looking at your audiences, to really don't just stop at male, female here. We are male, female, we are female, but we are very different. You can just even look at our dress code. She has braids, she has sister locks, she has dreadlocks.
Can I?
Sure.
Please. You probably will hate me for this, but if we got rid of traditional media, what would we have?
I don't know.
What's your suggestion?
No, I'm not saying we get rid of it. No, I'm not saying we get rid of it.
Yeah.
I think it's just being in position to understand what you're communicating and where.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Because this is a bit of a detour, but I think there are so many communities that still largely depend on radio, for example.
Yeah.
And if radio was taken away from them, I would feel terrible. It's like in communities where you don't banking halls have been closed down. You can no longer walk into the bank to do anything. If you need to process any documents with government, you can do all of that online. But what it's doing is that it's taking away life from people, especially the seniors who are only mostly, I guess, getting human interaction from those kinds of, almost business interactions. So I feel like if traditional media were to go away, there would be a lot of people who
left out.
Who are left out, who feel like, the morning radio host is like a brother to me, or like a sister to me, or like a child,
I don't remember the last time I
hope the days that traditional media goes away are so far.
It's not about.
Maybe not in this country. I don't think it's in this country, but
I hope it doesn't go away in any country.
But also, we have internet infrastructure challenges as a country, which then makes traditional media very relevant. Yeah. So I guess it goes back to your audience. Who are you speaking to?
Who are you speaking to?
But
I think where are they?
Thank you. Where are they? Yes, because if you're reaching a community in my district, home deep in the village, and you think you're going to reach them,
which one is your district?
That would be a stretch. So in the communities, radio works. So we need to be mindful of the audience and where they are.
But also, traditional media, there are still people who believe that it's not official until it's in the newspaper, or it's in the paper, or it's in the
and for
TV
certain topics,
or radio. For certain topics, like for example, with the Ebola crisis communication, if you don't have the traditional media communicating this, and we are going to rely on the citizen journalists or rely on social media, then there's that group of people who will say that it's not credible because I've not seen it on TV, I've not seen it in the paper.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Traditional media lends credibility to
here to stay.
Different things. So yes, it's here to stay.
Maybe unless somebody calls it fake news. Sorry, let's go on.
We don't have those somebodies in this country. It's been exciting. So I talked about comms flowers. So as we wind up, just think. Each one of us has 40 seconds max. Let's send those flowers. Based on the topic, which organizations would you send flowers to for exceptional communication in the past 30 days?
Uganda Media Center. I told you, I'm dying on this hill of micro press releases. I think that was a brilliant stroke. Yeah, it was really amazing to have a nation of people who don't really read, and to have the way it has taken over our social media. And that was brilliant, especially for a government organization.
The government agency.
Yeah.
Sharon.
That's a good one. I'd give mine to UNOC, the Uganda National Oil Company. I think they did such a wonderful job communicating through the fuel crisis. They were very organized.
Ebola really just covered everything. That didn't pay attention to that.
Yeah, so they were really organized, really proactive. They had data. Like I said, without data, people will make up stories. They had data on fuel reserves. Like we have petrol, we have diesel. Oh, and we have this many shipments coming in of oil. And the oil that we have in this country can take us this many days. Uganda is talked about as like an entrepreneurial country. Almost everybody is like has a deal in here or there. We're all hustlers. So people understand runway. They understand what it feels like to have so little left or so much left until you're on empty. So UNOC did a good job communicating all of that, but also saying like it let people know that we had enough fuel. We were not suffering. We were not about to shut down as a country, except when you went to the gas stations, there was a chance that there was a long line or fuel had run out. So they also did a good job explaining that was just a logistical problem. Border guy will say, Enoko ground, things are different, same as somebody who needs something transported, because whoever you call to help you transport that stuff will say, hey, fuel prices are really high. So maybe the only thing they would have done differently would have been to have a bit more empathy in the communication. Some of the options you were giving us in the previous questions were like, do we stick to just the numbers, the data, the facts? I think it would have helped to have some messaging around. And before I say that, they really had coherent messaging, consistent messaging across the board. But it would have been nice to say, hey, this is bad, but we see you, we understand the frustrations. I think people appreciate that kind of, being seen.
Otherwise, it brings up all other issues that we won't discuss, but you say two important things. Empathy in communications is very critical. And depending really on what it is that it doesn't work for everything, but for situations like that, it's critical. And consistency. The same thing we find on X should be the same thing. Or what your top guy says should be the same thing that someone else within your institution says. Thank you very much, Sharon. Nancy.
Yeah, so very quickly, I'm sending comms flowers. I'm sending comms flowers to, mine is quite obvious, the Ministry of Health. Number one, they embraced transparency, and they have maintained that in spite of the noise. There's been a section of people that has been criticizing the ministry for coming out about Ebola. And the argument is that the ministry should have managed it silently because now they've communicated and now we have travel bans and it's affecting their livelihoods. But I think at the end of the day, safety is priority. Yeah, we need to
prevention is better than
we really need to stay. I sympathize with them and I understand where they're coming from, but we need to preserve life because we only have one life.
Yes,
I'm
true.
also giving them flowers for their content formats. So you notice, I think they've issued only 2 structured press releases on social media. But most of their social media comms have been posters with infographics and quick, very simple, easy to digest messages. And I think for me, when it comes to emergency comms, that is what's very important. You need people to read these messages. If you pack so much information, and this is now we are now speaking the same language. If you pack messages with so much information, then you're going to lose the readers.
Yeah, so that's very
I'll
true.
give them flowers on that basis. And then finally, also sending the ministry flowers for controlling the narrative.
They did.
I've not seen misinformation because, they came out from the very first
incident, yes,
and they report it. And then they have a focal communications person, which is the permanent secretary. You don't hear messages coming from the PS, then this person, then this. It is one person, so there is consistency across the board. So for me, it's Ministry of Health. Thank you for keeping. I don't think there's anyone in Uganda who's not aware of Ebola. And because of that, people are vigilant. I've gone to places. There are hand washing basins, there's sanitizers, some what are they called? The temperature, the non-contact thermometers. So I think they've done a great job.
You know, my daughter told me, she's like, no hugging, no high-fiving until, she calls it Ebola, until they told them no hugging, no high-fiving until Ebola is gone. So that means that everyone
has got the message.
Has gotten the message. Thank you so much, ladies. This has been very, very beautiful. Our time is fast spent. And yes, all good things come to an end, unfortunately. So a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you. Do I even call you panelists? Podcasters, whichever. But thank you very much, Nancy. Talkers.
Communicators.
All of the above.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Trudy. It's been beautiful. There's like so many things, you know, and many other things that we can discuss in this room. I don't know. I kept taking mental notes of the things to, you know, that we can get back to and say, oh, we need to unpack this. Yes, but it's been a wonderful 1 hour. Time flies.
So fast.
Yes, it's been a wonderful 1 hour. And thank you very much. Truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for taking the time to be here and for sharing candidly, you know, not holding back. One thing that we can promise you is unfiltered. No filters, nothing, zero. We will tell you the truth as it is. And yes, we will keep you posted on our next episodes, but also would like you to, one, subscribe, two, give us your feedback on what you thought about this, and if there is anything you think we should unpack. And another thing, if you'd like for us to host you to be hosted on this podcast, please put it in the comments, leave us your contacts, your email, and we'll reach out to you. But we'll also be sharing a number that you can reach out. It's data privacy, so that you're able to reach out to us. And then we can, under topic that you feel you'd want to discuss on this podcast as a communicator, even when you're not a comms person, you know, because we're only a party anyways. Yeah. And we will be very happy to have you with us. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.